Hey guys, I'm Chris Buck and this is Guitar Revelations for WaterBear. And in this first episode I'm going to be taking a look at the advantages of being able to play with your fingers as well as your plectrum. Let's delve right in. So, the reason I wanted to talk about using my fingers, on my right hand I should say, need to say left hand by extension if you are left-handed, is this is one of those things that I get innumerable questions about on near enough a daily basis across social media and beyond. Comments and questions, comments very kindly alerting me to the fact that I use my fingers in case I hadn't noticed for whatever reason. Instagram can be quite strange, but more often than not it's comments just in regard to why I do this, why I started doing it, and more likely than not how I do it. I guess if this is something that you've never really tried to incorporate into your playing before, the kind of practicalities of it can actually be a little bit of a mystery. Even more so, I guess, if you're watching my videos at full speed, trying to figure out how this sort of plectrum sort of miraculously, confusingly disappearing and appearing between my fingers. It's a little bit of an idea to try and get your head around, but it's one of those things that, even though I don't think I really necessarily appreciated the benefits that this would bring when I actually started doing it, it's one of those things that I've been so glad that I incorporated into my playing. I really think it's taken my playing to another dimension. And it's just, as I said, it's one of those things that I'm very glad that I learned to do. I mean, purely on a very kind of boring, mundane, practical level, it's one of those things that if you have the sort of capacity to be a little bit more dexterous with your fingers on your right hand or left, the hand that's not on the fingerboard, in essence, to avoid confusion. If you have that added dexterity, we've all been in those inevitable situations where we drop the pick, and you've got to then try and get through the next 10-15 seconds worth of the song. Maybe you're doing some backing vocals, maybe your plectrums are back on the amp, or they're at the mic stand, wherever you have to try and get the spare one. If you have the sort of capacity to at least get through the next bit of the song just using your fingers, then more power to it. But in regard to why I started doing this, I think it literally probably is something as mundane as probably more than likely having dropped the plectrum while I was sat there, kind of teenager, noodling away on my guitar on the sofa, procrastinating when I probably should have been revising. Drop the plectrum, it's disappearing into that abyss that plectrums and pen lids inevitably occupy when they fall. And instead of bending down to try and find it, I've just started playing whatever it was. I was noodling away with my plectrum, but with my fingers. And that's literally probably how it started. So, not the most exciting sort of... It wasn't exactly a sort of an epiphany or a light bulb moment in that respect. But as I said, it's one of those things that I'm very glad I started to incorporate in my playing. Now, in regard to the benefits of this, I think the intro clip within this video is probably as good a reference point as any in regard to how often I kind of flick back and forth between the two. But if you're still confused as to what I'm talking about, something like this is probably the best way to show you. So... something a little bit like that. As I said, the intro clip is a better way to kind of watch this in context, I guess, or at least in the context of a track or a solo or a song. But that's kind of what I'm alluding to. Now, in regard to the benefits of those that I'm kind of glad that I've reaped since I started doing this, even though, as I said, I wasn't necessarily aware of this at the time, playing with my fingers has really, I feel, at least for me, taken my playing to another dimension. In regard to, it's a more freeing, more kind of touch-sensitive way of expressing whatever it is I'm trying to say on the guitar without what sometimes does feel like a needless conduit of a bit of plastic. And that's exactly it. I love plectrums. I'm going to be the last guy to ever try and advise you to ditch the pick, for want of a better phrase. As you saw in that clip then, I use one all the time. But having the capacity to think outside of always having to be there, rather, really is invaluable for the primary reason that a plectrum is always going to sound like a plectrum. You can play more lightly, you can dig in, but due to the fact that it is a piece of plastic that is kind of wedged between your fingers, it's always going to have that immediacy, it's always going to have that attack and kind of presence that you associate with the sound of a pick, irrespective really to a certain extent of what gauge you're using. Dunlop 1.14 for anyone interested, but it's always going to have the sound of a plectrum, whereas your finger, just to the fact that there are so many different kind of textures available. I mean, you've got your nail, which I guess inherently is going to sound a little bit more like a plectrum, but you've got the kind of fleshy bit on the top of your finger, you've got the kind of side of it, should you wish to use it. There's so many variations just literally at the tip of your fingers that you can get a whole different array of tonal variations, dynamic variations, textural. It really is a very cool thing to try and employ. So I guess the best way of demonstrating this really is to just kind of take a lick and show you what I mean. So if we just do something, you know... Obviously, with the plectrum, it has that attack, and as I said, it has that immediacy that you associate with the sound of a bit of plastic. Try and then do that with your fingers. Hopefully there you notice that first bit at the very least, I really focused on digging in with my nail. Really not dissimilar. Then on that final bit, that one being the exception, try to soften things up and play with the more kind of fleshy tip of my finger. There's a softness to the note, a kind of more slightly rounded quality, I guess, that really is, as I said, it's just that extra kind of dynamic capability, which I really find useful in regard to sort of just being able to flick between the two. And honestly, at this point, it's another thing I get a lot of questions about in regard to why I choose to use the plectrum for certain parts and why I choose to use my fingers. And again, in that respect, it really has got to a point in my playing now where I've been doing this long enough that it's not a kind of conscious thought process, I guess. This is not something I'm actively thinking about while I'm playing. It's just a case of, well, this next bit subconsciously would sound better with fingers. It would sound better if it has that kind of softer quality, whereas that next bit, I really want to dig in and have that kind of attack and immediacy of a plectrum. So as I said, it's really not a conscious thought process at this point, but really has proved to be one of those things that, you know, as I said, I really feel like this has kind of given another string to my bow, for the inevitable pun and cliche, but just really has kind of integrated itself into my playing over the past few years. So as I said, I'm going to be the last guy to ever to try and get you to ditch the pick. That's not the point of this at all. It's just a handy little thing, and if nothing else, it's a really cool idea to try and incorporate into your playing when you feel like you may be in a bit of a rut. We've all had it. We've all had those kind of inevitable moments where you can't necessarily be asked to try and learn anything else with your left hand. And it's a cool little moment to try and maybe think about, well, what can I do with my right hand? What can I try and do to take my playing to the next level? Through not necessarily learning anything different, you know, with my fretting hand, but just some different dynamic capabilities with my right. So again, just to give you kind of a bit of a better idea of what the hell I'm talking about. Something definitely worth touching upon, actually, that came to me then. It's just, as I said, the practicalities of this. Now, a lot of people who kind of employ this technique make use of using their thumb, their first and their second finger. Now, for me, I went through a brief phase when I was a kid of using my first finger exclusively to play guitar, which, when you're listening to a lot of punk rock stuff, is not necessarily the best idea in the world. There was a lot of this kind of stuff going on for quite a while. Which, the consequence of that is that nail is absolutely knackered, and if it grows beyond any kind of decent length beyond the end of my finger, snaps off immediately. And also the sensation of that kind of digging into string, it's kind of like nails down chalkboard, really not a pleasant experience. So that, in a kind of weird sort of serendipitous way, has given me this sort of place to try and tuck a plectrum in there and then use my thumb, second and ring finger on my right hand as a kind of bit of a claw thing going on. I appreciate a lot of the guys who do this, sort of stow the plectrum away, maybe in the kind of knuckle area like that. I'd find that a little bit more difficult, I guess. Yeah, getting back to the plectrum is not as fluid, but again, that's just because that's the way this technique is developed for me, and this is the way I've kind of gone about building it. If you were starting from scratch and you want to use that first finger, I can appreciate that idea is not for everyone, doing that kind of tucking it in there. I definitely recommend kind of trying to stow it in between your knuckles, but ultimately with this no right, no wrong. Whatever works for you is the best option. So in that respect, again, just dig in, give it some practice. As I said, this is really something that I've started to incorporate into my playing, and, you know, I guess the past 10 years or so now, looking back really, and really feel like it's taken me to another level. So, yeah, there we go. I hope you get something out of this. Thank you very much for watching. I've been Chris Buck. I shall see you soon. Cheers, guys.